Okay, so welcome. I will talk about or give an overview for the medical 2025 edition. I think I don't really remember when we started medical. Do you remember still? In 2015.
Yeah, something like this.
Yeah, so maybe it's 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
Something like that. So it's about visual question answering for gastrointestinal imaging. So actually, when we started medical, we just had images. Then we moved a bit to videos in between, and then we moved to spermatozoa videos, and then we moved back to gastro because that were people were most interested in that. So this is of course a work of a group of people, but I think Sushant did most of the work, to be honest. The rest is kind of the core medical team that is there almost every year. Bashira, Paul, and Stephen, who you know. So what was the task goal? So in general, for medical, we want to do something that is related to medical applications. As I said before, at the beginning, we had more like an image-related task, but then we tried videos to be more multimedia. It's kind of an easy hack to say we do multimedia research, we just do videos. And then we now have also included text and try to combine it with images, no videos. What did we want to do? Of course, we wanted to check if we can answer correctly medical-related questions. So medical image answering is kind of a very popular topic for benchmarking. But we also wanted to see if we can kind of provide some reasoning or some explanations why this answer was given. It's a bit inspired by a paper that came out now, it's I think a year ago or maybe 2 years, where they did medical question answering tasks or research on that. What they found out is that, okay, the model could give the correct answer, but for the wrong reason. So when you ask the model, why did you give this answer? It actually gave the wrong reason. Like, okay, I think here is cancer. Then you ask, why do you think it's cancer? Because it looks like a crane or something like that. So we wanted to better understand what's kind of the process, why is this happening? Try to bake that into this task. Core objectives, of course, we want to make more trustworthy, interpretable AI methods. That's kind of a core thing we usually try to do. And of course, test different benchmarking methods. So we also have this new data set, which is the extension of our quasi data set, which quite popular the last years, where we extended the imaging and video data set with medical questions. Any questions so far? Anyone sleeping? Oh. Okay. Yeah, I already said that. Basically, so I think everyone who was here at MediaEval more than once will know that why do you want to look at the GI endoscopy? Because there is something called colorectal cancer, which is one of the main cancers, especially in countries with high income. So, for example, it's number 1 in Norway for male and number 2 for female for cancer diagnosis. And the only gold standard to detect cancer that you can do is actually doing a colonoscopy. So you have this long tube, and you have a camera on the top, and then you put it inside of the human, and you kind of check everything inside, and then you try to find, usually what you want to find is polyps, which is kind of before it becomes cancer, and if you remove these polyps, you would actually avoid that the person gets cancer, then maybe dies from the cancer, has to have some treatment. So that's basically the main goal, why we want to do it. And the problem with this gold standard method we have now is that we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough colonoscopes and so on to actually do that for everyone. Because it's recommended, depends a bit on the country, but in Norway it's recommended from 50 years plus. In the US it's recommended from 40 plus. And then if you have some risk markers, like if you have PRC1 or 2 cancer gene, you should even do it earlier, like 30, 35 and so on. So who here has done that? No, it doesn't. I'll actually do one in 2 weeks, so it will be my first time. But it gives me completely new perspective on the research. I've done that. I've been there in the coloscopy room. I've looked at patients when they do it. That some patients they like it, so it's not the problem. But some patients they don't. It's kind of different. Yeah. So another reason is because some of these existing visual question answering benchmarks also lack this clinical transparency and also the clinical kind of connection. Because if you're good in answering multiple choice questions, so for example, in a data set, in a benchmark, does that mean that you're clinical relevant? So does that mean that if I take this model that is really good in answering these questions into a clinic and use it for everyday practice, does it actually do what it should, or is it useless? And that's not clear. Yeah, let's move on. So we had 2 tasks, or the main task is the visual question answering, of course. We had 2 subtasks. So the first one was standard performance on the question answering. So different scores that kind of tell us how accurate could the models predict answers to clinical questions. And subtask 2 was a clinical-oriented kind of explanations we wanted people to generate that we then can assess, which is of course difficult. Because you have to know a lot about the clinical practice and about you would even have to know a lot about the patients and the outcomes. So it's kind of challenging. So it's not 100% real world representative. So it's kind of giving us most probably a first idea that how this could work and how useful it could be, but it's not like now it's useful, now can we use it? So that insight we don't get. Okay? That's important to understand. And we, of course, wanted the people to mix textual and visual explanation, but I think most of the participants, they relied on the text, because that's, of course, easy to do. Yeah. So I already said what the goal was. We had the data set, which was 6,500 endoscopy images from the Quasir data set. And we generated 150 or 160,000 question answering pairs, which was kind of 2 steps. So first we did the kind of manual creation of the questions and answers. And then we also used, of course, AI to generate more synthetic question answer pairs. So these are not human generated, all of them. It's kind of a mix. Then we had different question types. So we had yes, no, we had single choice, multiple choice. We asked about color, location, different values, and so on. And we also had 3 levels of complexity. So it was like complexity level 1 could be, is there a polyp in the image? Yes or no, very low complexity. Complexity level 3 could be, is there a polyp and which type is it, and is it bleeding? Something like that. So more complex. And we had these different metrics. And subtask 2 was basically what I already explained a bit before. So we have an image question, and then we have answer the textual explanation, and then in addition we could have visual or confidence scores participants could deliver. And for the evaluation there we had different dimensions. So we used correctness, we used faithfulness, clinical relevance, and clarity. Yeah, so more details about the data set. So it was based on Quasir and Quasir instrument. So the Quasir data set has a bit of a history. So it started with the standard Quasir data set, which had 10 different categories. So it did not just have polyps and non-polyp images, but it also had bleeding, Barrett syndrome. So it had a lot of different findings we could have there. And then over the years, we kind of extended that a bit, and we've also refined the annotations, because when we started with the Quasir data set, it had around, I think, 1,000 images per class, so a total of 10,000 images. And of course, over the years, when people start using the data set and reported about it and wrote papers, we also said there were some mistakes in it. So we also tried to fix and extend the data set. And after a while, we also added a lot of videos. We added this question answering pairs, and we also added a huge amount of images that did not have any annotations. That we did around, I don't know if it was 2018 or something like that, when we saw that people actually would use not annotated images to train generative models. So then we also released these images. I think it has more than 1 million images and 600 videos or something like that, so it's quite big. It was collected in Norway in 3 different hospitals, and the annotations are, so the annotations we provide, they are checked by medical doctors. So usually each image has 3 medical doctors that agree on the finding. And everything is public available, and everything is completely open. So there's no limitation how you can use data either for research or commercial use. 2 minutes? What? Yeah, here we see an overview of the participants. I will not go into detail. We will hear the description of them afterwards. So Subtask 1, we had 1,500 images for public lead report. What was interesting, we kind of, during the challenge, we also found out there was some data leakage. So we solved that by also providing a private test set afterwards for the final evaluation. So the final evaluation we see now doesn't have data. Here you see some examples of the complexities, and for Subtask 2, so we had these dimensions we tested, correctness. So how accurate is it, the predicted answer, so simple metric, faithfulness. So how good is the alignment between explanation and the prediction? So if the model said something, they did reason in the right way for its prediction. Clinical relevance, so is the reasoning it provides medically relevant? Clarity, so how easy it is to read and understand, and also completeness. Okay, so here you see the winning team. We will see a bit more about it later, how they did their things. I won't go into details because of time. And here for Subtask 2, so we can also see that the 2 teams. So here we have 2 teams on the first place, which I think is a bit interesting. So I really want to look a bit deeper into that because it's sounds a bit fishy, if you ask me. Not that they cheated. I think more on the evaluation or there's something wrong with the data. So not that the teams did something wrong. And here the team was number 1. It's also interesting, we can actually see there's some relation between the scores we see here and the categories we see here. And this is also not the perfect evaluation because what we did here, we actually used the LLM suggestion, which is not the perfect kind of way of testing, but it's better than not testing it. I will not go into details here. I think we will see that from the presentations. Well, there are some interesting insights. We could see that people used actually quite efficient models, which I guess is because the teams we had were often students or smaller research labs, so they didn't have these huge computational resources, which then they had to compensate for, but they also managed to compensate for, which I think is a good sign for science in general, because it means we can actually do meaningful stuff. We did clever. We could also see a bit of the same models coming up several times. So could be that they're well known for being good for medical tasks and so on. Yeah, we could also see some hybrid architectures, curriculum learning and so on. So we had a lot of interesting mixes of different approaches, which I think was very interesting to see. Yeah. Also for the reasoning, I think it worked quite well, but I would have liked to see more visual reasoning also combined. What is also interesting, I think, is we can see that the workflow that we see now, the models are doing that, for example, they do some things before they actually do the analysis because they maybe get in some extra information. Then they do a visual analysis, they analyze the text, they combine these two. So it looks a bit like how a real doctor would work with different cases. So we can see that the kind of analytical pipeline follows a bit different pipeline. It's not a perfect match, but we can kind of see that this starts to getting close to each other, which is, I think, interesting, and maybe that's what we need I will not go into details because of the other details, because of the time. Yeah. I think most of these things are already said. So for future work, as I said before, I think it would be much nicer to see more combination of images and text for explanations and also for analysis, and also include temporal and video data, because that's also important for the procedure when you do the colonoscopy. And I also think we need to have a human in the loop preparation if we really want to show that these results are clinically relevant. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, that's for all the people.
Any questions? I do have one question. Thank you very much. That seems super interesting. I'm none of an expert in the field, so my question is very basic. What does the video include that is helpful for prediction, for actually seeing the polyp and the characteristics of the polyp that is not seen in a still image?
That's a good question. So when you do a colonoscopy, so sometimes some of the polyps are really difficult to see, because so the ones you usually see in papers are the very obvious ones, like this. They're sticking out and they look very big. Sometimes the ones that's sticking out that we see in papers and so on, they for example got water injected in that to make them more visible. So that it's much harder to find these polyps when it looks at the images. And what the doctors then what often happens is, so how the procedure works is, you go into the patient, you go up until the part where the small intestine and the large intestine meet, then you stop, and then you go backwards out, and you kind of just count the findings that you see when you go out. You ignore everything else when you go in. Mm-hmm. And that means that so when they go out, sometimes they miss polyps because they just don't see them. That's something you only get when you move, because they may be in the frame just 1 second or even less. And even if you annotate these videos, it's really hard to find these polyps. So I think when you would analyze the videos, you would also find these polyps that, for example, annotators and so on miss. Sometimes you have to look at them from different angles because it's not clear, is this polyp? So they go back, they kind of go from different angles. They also use dye or paint to kind of paint them so that the dye. So they use some dye to kind of paint them, and then you see that you kind of can see the surface much better. It's a lot about texture, how they look. And then you also have flat polyps, which don't stick out at all. So they are very difficult to see, but they're still visible because of the texture on top. So that's something that visual vision models are very good to pick up. And there are lots of things that play into account there. So you could also, if the patient didn't do a proper cleaning of the bowel, they also have to use a lot of water, which then makes it harder to see things. And so there's a lot of, it's not so easy to just, here's a nice picture of a polyp. The real world is messy.
Okay.
It's dirty, kind of inside.
So it's as important with video prediction, it's as important to predict that there is a polyp or not as to predict in which frame you can see the polyp.
Yeah. And what they also want, for example, is one of the metrics they want to use for doctors to see if they did their colonoscopy in a good way, because of course we find good and bad doctors, especially if we work a lot with medical doctors, you kind of understand that they're also just humans. They make a lot of mistakes. So one of the metrics they want to use is actually how much of the colon were really observed. And then for that you could also use the model and say, okay, now you can make predictions like 90% the surface of the colon is seen, which then you can relate to clinical studies where you know that if you have looked at 90% of the surface of the colon, you have most probably found 95% of the colon. And so there's a lot of extra things that you can actually see from the videos. You don't see in the pictures. Thank you very much.
All right, for the eye of the time, I think we better move on to the next presenter. So thanks again.
Thank you.